Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Glad you're here with us to enjoy Anna's great ideas once again. A couple of ground rules. Let's make sure everyone has turns. If you have a chance to speak for a minute or two, then make sure everyone else has a chance to jump in. Not everyone is quick to jump in, so let's leave some good spaces for that to happen. Also, if you could please mute your mic if you're not speaking, that would be great, since several of us have auditory processing challenges. And as usual, be nice. Don't usually have to tell that group, tell this group that too much. We're pretty good to each other. Let's leave the chat function as much as we can to the people who only communicate through chat. And if you're communicating through chat and you want your comment or question read out loud, just write read before you write your comment. Roger is obviously not feeling well, but we'll do our best to field all of the comments. So with that, I'll turn it over to Anna. Anna.
Thanks so much, Don, and thank to all of you, as usual, who found the time and connected and are with us here today. Everyone's usually very nice. I mean, always. I don't think we've yet had an episode of someone not being nice. Do we maybe have a volunteer, someone that would like to read the chat once in a while? Do we maybe have a person that would be willing to do something like that? If not, it's okay. I can just have a look and stop once every.
I can hop in if you need help. Okay.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so today's going to be 50-50. 30 minutes me talking and then 30 minutes us having a discussion, just so that you know what we are going to do. Yeah, so our session today, argument culture, a little bit about consensus building, a little bit about a little bit more on discourse, kind of closing thoughts, and something new that emerged for me over the last month, which was relentless incrementalism. Yeah, and I made this presentation schedule a while back, and only a few days ago, while preparing this presentation, I realized that this is our last call before Christmas. And coincidentally, or more like maybe synchronously, we'll be talking about argument culture, which I think is a good warm-up for Christmas dinner, right? Especially if you're the only autistic member of your family, or one of the few. And yeah, and while I certainly do not want to encourage or incite you to engage in arguments, I do think that if you wish to drop any saucy bombs on some of your less understanding family members, then this session might provide some helpful insight. Not to incite, but to deter, you know. Yeah, so argument culture and relentless incrementalism. I really like quotes, so I'm going to use a quote now and then and just put it in a chat for you to kind of resonate with that. Yeah, so I was reading a lot of Martin recently, and I found this quote and I really liked it. Just as words derive meaning not only from their direct reference, but also from unspoken alternatives, our awareness of a phenomenon is shaped both by what we directly experience and by the alternatives that could have been presented, but were not, right? So in other words, the richness of the context, both what is explicitly experienced and what remains implicit, affects how fully we incorporate that variation into our awareness. And the purpose of today's session is essentially to bring attention, to bring our awareness to the existence of variation and its sheer scope. And my reasoning behind this idea is the following. I think that an expanded understanding of context is essential for recognizing the complexity of learning about the self, the other, and consequently integrating these two into social or personal applications, right? So it's about navigating not only what is visible, but also the unseen alternatives that ultimately shape our perception and understanding. You know, I kind of a sort of a treasure hunt. So in order for us to first grasp or identify the kind of structure onto which sensory and non-sensory experiences are received, we need to talk about communities of practice, I think. And you know, communities of practice represent these social structures in which learning is defined and enacted through shared experiences, you know, roles and norms. It's something of a family, right? And I think CASY is one such group. So is to some extent Yale University and even the United States of America, right? So while the US may not be a community of practice per se, it is a social structure in which learning is defined and enacted through shared experiences, although not always equally represented. But even when we find ourselves unrepresented, our experiences continue to be influenced by the majority experience or the represented experience. And and these kind of communities have existed since the beginning of human history, apart from nation states, that is. From tribes, you know, gathering around the fire to modern day professional networks and whatnot. And yeah, like I said, I think CASY aspires to be a community of this sort, because here we are supposed to learn together as we each participate in collective activities such as this session. So you know, so therefore our learning is certainly personal, but it is not exactly an individual endeavor. It's a collaborative process, and it is shaped by our personal, social, cultural context, some of which, you know, we share, some of which are dramatically different for each one of us. And the purpose of our participation here is mapping out that commonality, which is autistic culture, right? So picking off where we left off in November and continuing sort of in a spirit of exploring ways of being before we dive into ways of doing. Today, we're going to talk about finding middle ground and sort of blurring boundaries and sailing the sea of the argument culture. And also additionally, and like I mentioned, this is something that emerged for me over the past month. I'd like to touch with you on the concept of relentless incrementalism. So in other words, how do we set our course for consequent, small, purposeful action rather than immediate and radical change? Because I think that the concept of relentless incrementalism is very autistic at its core, actually. So yeah, a lot of concepts that my university professors will probably say have nothing in common. Yeah, so let's start with saying a few words about argument culture. So argument culture is, in other words, the reason why your neighbor is always ready to pounce on you. Is an idea popularized in the late 80s, early 90s by this linguist called Deborah Tannen. I think she was a professor at Georgetown University, if I remember correctly. And Tannen used this term to refer to this social tendency to approach communication, decision-making, and also conflict resolution as adversarial, right? Combative, polarized. So this mindset kind of frames discussions and exchanges as battles to be won, rather than opportunities to collaborate, to explore, to find common ground. So how do we identify argument culture, right? So the framing of an argument is always adversarial. So the conversations are framed as a kind of a binary conflict. So there must be a winner and there must be a loser. There's nuance, complexity, and broader context are often ignored in favor of clear opposition, right? Another element that is usually there is polarization. So issues are represented in either or terms, creating this kind of false dichotomy. So for example, debates are usually reduced to two sides only, even when there's so many perspectives that exist. So that's another one. Combat metaphors. So the language, we always go back to language. Language used in discussions like that often draws on this kind of a lexicon of war and sports, the white male lexicon, attacking arguments, winning debates, defending positions, and yeah, and there's also a preference for confrontation, right? So, and this is especially visible in media and in public discourse. There's a preference for heated debates and controversy over constructive dialogue. Yeah, I think that's clear to most of us, right? We're so used to this particular one. And another one is undermining cooperation, right? So argument culture is really focused on competition and an argument that discourages any kind of collaboration, any kind of problem solving, and basically any kind of mutual understanding. So why are we talking about this? I think it's important, you know, also for us to mention that argument culture arises from cultural, historical, and institutional influences. So the first thing that comes to our mind is media, right? Sensationalism and the need for controversy over just shared understanding, but it's also legal systems. Many countries have the kind of adversarial legal systems that reinforce the winner takes it all outcome. It's also education. It's another tool, just maybe more covert one, where, you know, debates and critical thinking skills, you know, whilst valuable, are very often misinterpreted and just not considered a priority. And individualism. I think this is a big one for all of us here. Most of our modern Western cultures prioritize individual success and competition over any kind of shared goal that we may have. So yeah, it's not really ideal, right? This culture of ours of communication, but I think we can juice it to some extent, you know, because as they say, every disease contains within itself the very cure for itself. So this sort of divide and conquer technique forces us, right, as the sheep, to navigate paradox. And our option in the face of paradox, our most non-violent, and I think we all agree that's really the only viable option, because violence is never an option. Our only option is to bridge through this kind of ongoing negotiation, that this simultaneous hybrid existence of mutually exclusive internal, external, and relational realities, right? It's very much the new autistic physics. Yeah, and funnily enough, you know, as not just the sheep, but the black sheep of our human communities, I think the autistic community has really managed to kind of release themselves from this obligation to abide by this surgical division. Right? Now we just have to convince the rest of the world that they too need to see a doctor. And yeah. And another guy that I've been reading recently, Brunner, he defines this openness as I'll put that in a chat. A willingness to construe. I cannot copy.
Can I hop in too? Because today it's aligned. I was actually writing about hyperreality today, and I was watching a bit of video from a philosopher, Umberto Eco. I think I might be pronouncing that wrong, but he was a writer also. Yes, he was late, I believe. He was addressing the creation of the self through the act of argument. So we define ourselves through this act of adversary argument, and I just thought that was so aligned. I saw that this morning, so that's another way that is really, and I see it in this little guy behind me, and I am so hypersensitive to his just culture, right? They have this roast culture where argument is almost like a way to define identity, and it's to me really beyond about making a point entirely and about defining identity. We do it as jokes. Yeah, they do it as jokes. Yeah, he's like, Mom, I'm kidding. I'm like, that was mean. So yes, there's that aspect as well for the younger folks.
Guys, this is all cool, and I don't want to silence anybody, but we're going to have a half an hour at the end. I know that Anna works really hard on these presentations, so she didn't get through it at one point, and I want to be sure that she has all the time she needs. Again, not trying to silence anybody, but if we could let that flow the way that she's got it in her mind, I think that will be helpful for her. Okay? All good?
Yeah, we can get back to that. I don't have much left. I think 15 minutes more, and that'll be it. Yeah. So willingness to construe knowledge and values from multiple perspectives without loss of commitment to one's own values, and that is, once we have gone through that phase of kind of establishing what our identity is and what those values are. The Greek skeptics also used to refer to this as a epoche. Same concept, just a different name. So consensus building, right, is another thing. So if we reject argument culture, how do we build consensus? Well, it's an ongoing process, obviously, and it really calls on us to kind of embrace this idea that best collective judgment is always subject to review by the broader group of participants, and any such judgment remains tentative until additional evidence, arguments, or differing perspectives are presented that may alter it. So I think this is why it's essential to seek out and encourage viewpoints that challenge the prevailing norms of dominant culture, right? And that's whether in matters of class, race, gender, technology, or environmental protection, disability, anything. And at the same time, it is really crucial, perhaps even maybe more so, to sustain, and this is something that falls really close to my heart, to sustain and nurture this kind of space of hybridity that prevents us from becoming anchored to fixed ideas. I think it's really important. And a space like that allows us to kind of to remain flexible, to accept this inherent volatility, for a lack of a better word, of the best situation, to cultivate the skill of staying open, to continuously negotiate our current understanding, to basically never settle, definitely. Yeah, so an argument, because argument based on the unchallenged norms of culture will always be less informed and dependable, right, than that based on a wider range of experiences. Okay, I have another one to share here for you, and this one's my favorite. But this PDF is making it difficult for me to copy. I really like this one. If one has a totally revolutionary way of expressing understanding, they may be unable to find support from others, obviously. It may take years to convince the world of the validity of a revolutionary idea, but for the concept to become validated, if it cannot be proven empirically, as most great things can't, its justification must eventually be established through discourse. It must be advocated by for the communities of practice. Our purpose here, essentially, right? So in striving for consensus, it's important to not only seek a wide range of views, but to allow dissension, right? And discourse requires only that participants have the will and the readiness to seek understanding and to reach some reasonable agreement, right? And such things as feeling of trust, solidarity, security, empathy are essential preconditions for such full participation in discourse. And it is not based on winning arguments, right? It centrally involves finding agreement, welcoming difference, trying on others' points of view, identifying the commonality rather than contradiction. By the way, all that I'm reading to you are theories of well-known academics that have existed in the scholarly universe for decades, right? It's nothing new. The reason I picked them and am resharing them through my mouth is that I feel that while I am an authority in very few things, not going crazy may be one of them. And the longer I live and the longer I am a part of this group, the more I realize just how good at masking I have become. And it doesn't make me feel proud. In fact, it actually makes me feel sad. That I lived for, sort of for so long unaware of how much it cost me to adhere to the norm and how strict I have been in disciplining myself not to deviate. So much so that I made my divergence untraceable, even to myself at some point. But critical theory really helped me. It helped me to understand that what I always felt was not outlandish, that this odd, strong sense of justice that we all share in this community is not, not from this planet. It shifted my focus towards the relationship between the oppressor and the oppressed, which I think is really essential to any kind of conversation about identity, and essentially set in motion probably the biggest healing of my life, which was uncovering my generational trauma and claiming it for the potential that it has, not for the consequences that it caused. So it really helped me find myself in the chaos that this dimension is, and this is why I am sharing this with you before we jump into 2025. Probably these sessions will look a little bit different from January on. And mostly because I want to help all of us find tools towards being able to source more accurate and complete information about the world, to be free from coercion and distorting self-perception, to nourish the openness to alternative points of view, to have the empathy and concern about how others think and feel, to hone this ability to, weight evidence and assess arguments objectively, to always seek the greater awareness of the context of ideas and to reflect on assumptions of our own, first and foremost, and to be willing to accept the fact that our current best judgment is only a test of validity until new perspectives are to be found or to be felt. Yeah, so wow, 27, almost exactly half an hour. So my lecturing is nearly over. There's only one more thing I want to share with you. That's the idea of relentless incrementalism. And it's this kind of strategy or approach of making continuous, small and deliberate improvements or changes over time to achieve significant lasting outcomes. So it emphasizes steady progress rather than dramatic or revolutionary transformations. So why use it, right? I think it's, well, first of all, because it doesn't seem like there's any huge revolution coming our way, not the kind that happened in France in the 18th century. And second of all, because I think we can start getting ready for one, but on a much smaller scale. And relentless incrementalism can really help us to avoid overwhelm, right? So this large scale change can be daunting, and it's a process that's very prone to resistance. And relentless incrementalism makes goals more achievable by basically breaking them into smaller, digestible tasks. And it also reduces risk. because we have more time and space for correction along the way. So we're minimizing the risk of failure that's often associated with these kind of sweeping changes. And it builds momentum, which is essentially what we're doing here, right? So each small success can motivate further progress, creating this sort of snowball effect. And I also think it's just more sustainable, right? So it's because gradual change, it's less prone to shatter. It's just more stable. It has a more of a solid foundation than something that happens very fast. So, while great changes have been achieved in the past through direct revolutions, perhaps whilst we are waiting for a moment of such, we can incrementally take agency over what is awaiting our attention in our own lives and communities. And and relentless incrementalism emerged for me as important to include here as a form of critical hope and activism, because we are not merely talking about alternative communication for ego-derived reasons. Like, we're discussing it because at the heart of this conversation lies a common preoccupation that we share, right? And that's the desire for the more inclusive, diverse, colorful, non-hierarchical world. And I also believe that relentless incrementalism is foundational to relational accountability, which is where our discussion begins. And the first, you can just share whatever comes to your mind, but the first question I wanted to ask you is the one I'm going to put in the chat. And it's the following: how am I being accountable to my relationships in life? And I don't want us to look at this question only through the prism of other people. Let's also ask, how am I being accountable to my relationships with land, with animals, with ancestral history, with my heritage, with my pain and my pleasure, with my intersectional characteristics and identities? Yeah.
If I could jump in, Anna. Couple things I didn't mention at the top. Just want to be sure everybody has a chance. I know we're always excited, and I love that. I think sometimes the people that are a little slower to comment have a difficult time getting heard. So if we could keep our comments, sort of brief and let everyone have their turn, that would be great. And I also wanted to say, in regard to what you were talking about, Anna, I've noticed that I have a growing resentment about the ways that that my ways of being are always being translated into that framework of argument culture. For example, the term fawning was recently, it's gotten popular recently as this kind of, weak and fawning way of responding to conflict. And I just really think that's dangerous, terms like that for our community, because, for example, if I run into conflict, the way that I usually deal with it is to be less and less threatening, to try to find a common ground so that people can relax and we can talk about things. That has nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with this connective strength that I have, that I believe in. So for me, sort of decolonizing and thinking about the ways that my behavior is framed, being inaccurate is one way that I remain accountable.
Thank you, Dawn, for sharing what you have just shared on so many levels. And that's essentially the aim of this session and my idea of alternative communication, to always seek the broader understanding. And even if we feel we have achieved such, to perhaps withhold, opposed to what, because I think what you were referring to was essentially conformism, right? We and also he's at that age, and I remember when I was at that age, when I was really set on kind of shaping my identity, and because of the societies that we all live in, because they are capitalist and inherently violent, there is I think we all experience that phase when we embrace violence in one way or another. This is something I've mentioned and something I'm going to repeat. What critical theory has really helped me understand is that even when I do feel that I understand, and even when I do feel that I have the knowledge, the best course of action is actually to remain in this space of hybridity and not put myself in any of the poles, because that only fuels the argument culture. And only in that space of hybridity where we come more with how we feel, less with how we think about the world, we will be able to achieve some kind of shared understanding. Yeah, this is just how I feel about this, and hopefully you can kind of also approach what I'm saying with more of a sensory experience than just by listening to my words, because I have a real problem with words. I always feel like they convey something completely different to what I have in mind, and also I'm always thinking about how I hold this certain meaning of a certain word, and then another person holds a completely different one. And at the end of the day, despite our purest intention, it's going to be really difficult for us to come to some kind of understanding purely because of that, because we just use language in different way. I'm just going to read this thing that I put here in a chat. Thank you, Anna, for your always inclusive and expansive insights as I meld with your words, especially about the necessity of all voices and consensus. I am moved by the grace, eloquent, and expressive ways many of us move in this Zoom meeting. Movement and nonverbal ways of connecting have always been especially meaningful to me. I just wanted to share my appreciation to everyone here, especially those of us who speak with such eloquent movements in unison and conversation with what is shared here. My favorite things said here are the things with no words, I guess. So thank you. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's, yeah, no words, more from me. Would anyone else like to share something? Yeah, go ahead.
This is my first time here, so I really appreciate this, and it's really timely for me, not only for my own life, because and did my trauma journey as a therapist. My dissertation was on my trauma, but it was always missing some part of it. And when I finally found my diagnosis as being something that's very personal since my infancy, it really changed my life. And it's brought people into my life who both were afraid to tell me that they were looking at neurodivergence for a couple of years, but when I shared my experience, then some of my clients came forward, and then I'm finding that I don't even have it on my website, but people are coming forward. And the irony is that they're curious about their autism and their ADHD. As a somatic psychotherapist, I find it especially interesting in women's bodies when we combine PMDD, PMS, when we combine the way they've been raised as children of being called the difficult one in class while they weren't. The boys in the room were being diagnosed ADHD, but they got no support. They were shamed, and the way that that carries through the body. So I believe that what you're saying, I appreciate very much, because everywhere we see argumentation, but the way that I work with my clients somatically does go on longer, and it's in increments and it's small pieces, and sometimes our bite doesn't come back for a year later. but these pieces that the female bodies who are wrestling by not getting a diagnosis, it's too expensive, but also the way their bodies seem to fail them. And the combination between the autistic brain and the ADHD unfocused with the PMDD has been very striking physically for me, and how to not have them continue to argue with themselves while they have to argue with doctors and what medications are best, and they don't want to be medicated in certain ways. So I think there's a lot of layers in what you're bringing in your language and your focus on this with somatics as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I relate to that because my own sort of journey towards healing started with an extreme sensations of pain that were and essentially a response to not only something that was living in me for so many years unaddressed, but also the kind of social and professional environment in which I found myself. I was a flight attendant for 3 years, and I'm claustrophobic and I have a fear of flying. So it was really amplified. And it brought me, but I'm thankful for that experience because it brought me to a point where, well, I just really had to touch the bottom and be able to kind of kick back against it. But pain has been an inspiration of a strange sort in my life to always seek what else is there and which other ways I can embrace myself. So I really, and movement is a way that I have sort of came back to myself and eventually managed to reduce that pain. So it's something that I really relate to.
And late diagnosis means I also get to grieve all the pain I went through, the monthly cycle. I'm a dissociated body going to a somatic doctoral program, and I was asked to move, and that's not always what works, and yet I can enjoy a yoga practice, but getting my dissociating body to do that, there's so many layers to a neurodivergent autistic brain-body system that I'm fascinated by the individuality of that, as well as the difficulty in the world, because we're just beginning to give more diverse identification to it and open to it. So I appreciate this group.
Absolutely. Thank you. Would anyone else also like to share something? Maybe I'll go through the chat and see if there was something else. No, it wasn't just my quotes. It doesn't have to be. I actually have more questions. I completely forgot. So I'll put them in the chat. This one's a bit of a philosophical one, but we are a philosophical group. The fishes are the last ones to discover water. How can we prepare for the unknown by the means of the known? I saw that one and it struck a chord with something. How can we prepare for the unknown by the means of the known?
It always does come back to that, right? The thing that's so close to us, we can't even see it. And I think that's one of the hopes that we find in our culture, in our community, is that our idea of context requires that we come out of ourselves and we are relational with the environment and with other living things, animals, other human beings, etc.
Organic. Yeah.
Yes, organic and dynamic.
Absolutely. We say in Polish, when there's 6 chefs, there's usually no dinner. But I think that's the whole phrase. I don't think there's a second part to it. Yeah. I mean, certainly reason and seeking out greater understanding is a part of it. Probably also just kind of navigating, partly in the dark. How else can we get in touch? What kind of other communication can we initiate with the world around us? And the first session that I hosted on alternative communication. I remember it was a bit of an experiment, and I kind of asked all of you to express yourself through some kind of a movement or a drawing or a sound that you make. And the way I would probably approach this question would be that, because when I read this question, I think of the time back in August, we had a small earthquake here in Portugal. It's a much more of a practical story, but I remember waking up 5 a.m., my whole house was shaking, and it traumatized me so much that it took me 2 months to be able to put myself to sleep basically after that. And then there's this whole, element of living with the impending. And the way I have been preparing myself for the unknown is, both, a really intense research into what I can do, preparing a sort of like a survival bag for myself, but also having an intense inner dialogue where I essentially bring myself closer to the concept of death, dying, passing, my own mortality, and the kind of an acceptance of it. And the result of it so far has been that I find myself much more attuned to the present moment, to the now. So I think, it's sensory and not, it's reason, and it's all of the things that are not exactly the favorites of our modern science. I'm just going to read this comment. I am laughing because I am both so curious. So many certificates, books, studies, and yet my brain will go very much into hyperfocus. Good point. Yeah. For me, I very often also, when I get overly excited, I completely forget what I was saying, or I forget the language altogether. Or sometimes when I have the podcast conversations, when I receive a lot of really interesting input, I'm kind of making a note in my mind on what to ask next. I end up not asking anything because it's just too much. Nonverbal communication is a really interesting subject. My godchild feels more comfortable sitting with me in silence for long periods of time, and they recently began exploring whether or not they're on the autism spectrum. It's been an interesting journey in professional athletics, where nonverbal communication is crucial, and maybe just a few more gold medalists than expected excel in sports because their sports is an autistic special interest. Not the case for my godchild, who recently graduated from an Ivy. Congratulations. And one more. Can we prepare for the unknown by means of the known? I wonder if it isn't a matter of trust. Is it a matter of trusting our spirits, our perceptions, despite normative disbelief, and trusting our validity as interdependent beings? Our existence is always a dialectic between the possible and the probable. Absolutely. I say lean into the possible, the unknown, cultivate trust in this. Beautiful. Has also put here, just wonder, have anyone coped with long-term social isolation? What's the experience like, and how did you cope with the difficult time? I cannot answer that because I really don't mind social isolation, but perhaps someone who has had that experience would like to share. And I don't know, have an advice of sort.
Thanks. I was just going to jump in since we only have a few minutes and see if anyone who has not shared today wants to jump in. Maybe nobody does, but I always like to give the chance.
There's one more question I had for you, and we're not going to have time to answer it, but I'm just going to put it in the chat. Perhaps you'd like to ponder on it individually. And the question is, what role does discomfort play in our life? What is the role of discomfort in fostering dialogue and progress? I think we've also kind of touched on it. I was also 26 when I started to do my trauma work and unpacking my family history. And it came as a huge surprise to me, and it came as an enormous surprise to my mother. So, so yeah, I was, and on the issue of tracing patterns, I don't want to use the word recommend because everyone's got a different taste, but the book by Julia Cameron called The Path of an Artist has really helped me. It's a kind of like an instructional book, a guidebook, where you basically journal a lot. And yeah, and it really helped me to kind of like reconnect to myself. So perhaps that's something that you could look into also.
Well, brilliant as always. I don't know if people want to stay a little longer. It's up to you, Anna. If you want to facilitate more discussion. Just want to quickly remind people that our poet Nathan is going to be doing a session today as well at 7 Eastern.
Yeah, sorry, Dawn. I because I just went to Facebook and I see that it's for December the 6th, which is tomorrow.
Roger said it was today, but
Meetup has it listed for today at 7 as well.
Okay.
Okay, I think that's accurate because Roger and I were just discussing that. But the Zoom link is actually in the event description.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll just turn it over to you, Anna, to finish up how you like.
No, yeah, that was all. Just wanted to say the date is December 6th, but then in the description it's December 5, so all clear. No, I just wanted to thank you all for attending as always and sharing either by speaking up or just in the chat. I very, very, very much appreciate your time, and yeah, and thank you for being here and for participating and for also giving me a platform to share, because this is huge for me and hopefully good for the community. So thank you so much.
It definitely is, and I can't wait to see what you're going to do in the new year. I always love everything you do. I always think Anna can't top what she's done, and then you always manage. So sending you lots of love, and yeah, can't wait. And everybody, hope to see you in a little while.
Yeah, thank you so much. I do not have papers. I am only getting ready to do my PhD. Maybe in 2025 I'll be self-publishing a book though. Almost done. So yeah. Thank you so much. And have a great Christmas for those of you who are celebrating.
Yes, thank you so much. All right, everyone, thank you, and see you soon.
Bye-bye.